Good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to this presentation on slap tonguing. And well, I want to reiterate that if you have questions as we go along, please ask. And if it's helpful to have a visual aid, you can always turn your camera on to ask anything specifically. I wanted to do a presentation on slap tonguing because when I learned, I read a lot of blogs and watched a lot of videos, and I got a very bleak report. Several people told me it took them years to learn, and that they broke their reeds, and they cut or bruised their tongues, and I was seeing the comments that somebody said 3 years for them, and so I was actually thankfully able to learn much. 2 years for another attendee. Thanks for chiming in. So it sounds like some of you have some experience with slap tonguing already, which is really great. And I was planning to give a recital in graduate school, and I had picked out a bass clarinet duet, and my colleague ended up telling me that due to health reasons he wasn't able to perform with me, and so I started taking to unaccompanied bass clarinet solo repertoire, and I found Michael Lowenstern's Drift, and I really liked the piece, but my recital was 2 months out, and it had slap tonguing, so I was a little scared and kind of intimidated to do this, but you know, nothing like a deadline to inspire you to get going. So I did it, and thankfully I was able to learn in a month. I didn't break a single reed, and or bruise my tongue or anything like that. So it is possible, and I wanted to share with all of you the steps that I took so hopefully you could also have a successful experience learning how to slap tongue. But before we talk about what the steps are, the most important thing to know exactly what slap tonguing is. I've worked with some of my colleagues, and people who've been working on it kind of had different approaches, and the most important thing to know is that slap tonguing is a percussive effect created on single reed instruments that is created by the reed popping against the mouthpiece when it is released after forming a suction with the tongue. And so it's not just aggressive tonguing, and it sounds something like this. And in the context of music, I'll play a little excerpt from Michael Lowenstern's Drift. And I also want to note that this technique is much easier to achieve on the bass clarinet than on the soprano clarinet. I'm still working on it on the soprano clarinet, but the larger surface area of the reed makes it a lot easier. So just a note for anybody who's still working on learning it. And I should also say that it's a difficult thing to learn because just like if we're teaching regular articulation and we say the tip of the tongue to the tip of the reed, ultimately all that happens inside of the mouth. So it's kind of difficult to know exactly what's happening. But I'm going to give you my 10 tips, and hopefully these will help you in your learning journey. So the first step is to create a suction with your tongue on the bass clarinet reed or another flat object. I learned using the reed, but a lot of people suggest different objects, from spoons to clear plastic or glass, so you can kind of see what the suction looks like, or using like a popsicle stick or something that you can create the suction with. So what we want to do is create that suction here. It should be pretty strong, and you can even try talking with the reed attached. Oh, I just broke my reed. Look at that. I said I hadn't, but there's a first time for everything. So you would definitely want to use some older reeds as you're learning this technique. And you want to create that section. You can practice talking, anything to make sure that it's really strong, and you can kind of test it to see if you can get a pop by pulling the reed away from your tongue. You should be able to hear that pop over the camera. And another thing that you can do as you're practicing this, because ultimately the reed is going to be releasing from the tongue and hitting the mouthpiece. And so if you hold the reed and you practice releasing your tongue, you should be able to see the reed fly up and hit your upper teeth. So something like this. So not exactly like that, but something very similar. And so you just want to work on getting that really good suction. And once you've worked on that, then we want to go to the step number 2, which is working on creating that suction with less of the reed in your mouth. And this is where it starts to get a little harder. As you're working on the suction, I think there's 2 different ways that kind of help. One, if you can roll your tongue, you can kind of grab the reed like this, or you can also make your tongue concave, like that, and that'll help hold on to the reed. So we're going to start using less and less the tongue to create that suction. And the pop as you do that won't be as loud, but it is still there. And ultimately that's the kind of suction that we use while we do the slap tonguing. So the next thing that I do is I put the reed onto the mouthpiece and have it with the neck, and your goal is to make that same kind of suction, but you aren't going to be making your embouchure. So that will be something like this. So you have that suction, and you are just doing that with the clarinet mouthpiece and the neck. And it's really important to think about how different this sounds and feels compared to regular articulation. So we have kind of a slap here. And if I'm just touching my tip of the tongue to my tip of the reed, it sounds, you know, pretty basic. You can't even hear that making any sound at all. So after we do the suction with the clarinet partially assembled, we want to go on and start forming an embouchure while maintaining that suction. And so it's a slow progress over time, and that will help you transition from sucking on just the reed, creating that suction, and then creating it with the mouthpiece and the neck. The next step is to add air, and for me, this was by far the most difficult. I didn't know how to blow while I was playing, and my best piece of advice while you're doing this is to just not be afraid of whatever comes out. So it might squeak, it might squawk, you might not get the tone, but don't be afraid as you add your air. And that's a perfect example. It didn't come out exactly how I wanted, and then, you know, I just did it again, and, you know, you kind of want to navigate around until you can figure out how to add the air. And as you're doing this, you transitioning to playing the instrument, you'll want to be conscious about what types of reeds you select. A lot of people like softer reeds for this, older reeds just in case you break one or chip one, and a lot of people also like to practice with synthetic reeds. The next most important thing that I can recommend is to consider your voicing. And a lot of people that I have talked with, and some people that I've also worked with, they could get the suction and had a basic idea of how that worked, but as they were learning the technique, they would just squeak, and then they'd squeak some more. And this was kind of how I got started too. It was a little squeaky and inconsistent. And when you think about your voicing, it's going to make a really big difference. So when you're manipulating your tongue position to do the slap tongue, your voicing is inevitably going to be changed. So you're going to want to compare how your embouchure and your air and all those things to see what might be doing different. Maybe your jaw is different. That kind of check all the physical things. But I would argue even more important than that is to audiate, to hear the pitches in your head before you begin to play. And so you might want to play with a drone. When I was working with one colleague, helping him with his slap tonguing, we were working on the neck, and he just kept squeaking. As soon as I played just the pitch on the bass clarinet neck, he was able to match that and figure out exactly where his voicing needed to be. So any kinds of things that you can do to address your voicing are going to make a really big difference. The next step that I want to discuss is your tongue position. So there's a lot of different approaches to tongue position, and in regards to voicing, when I first started to learn to slap tongue, I kept dropping the back of my tongue, and that was part of the reason why I was squeaking a lot. But I also realized that as I was articulating, that I needed to use a different part of my tongue to be able to switch back and forth from standard articulation to slap tonguing, so something like this. And so working just strictly tip to tip meant that I needed to move my tongue a lot, and it wasn't as helpful. So I kind of adjusted my tongue position when I knew that I was going to be needing to integrate slap tonguing. And as I was reading about slap tonguing, some authors and podcasters kind of suggested an anchor tonguing position for the tongue, and I personally tried this, and it wasn't very effective for me because I didn't have as much surface area available to create the suction when part of my tongue was hiding behind my teeth. But that is definitely something that you can try because it's worked very well for some other people. And then once you start to get the hang of it, I think it's really important to think about slap tonguing as just another articulation and not an extended technique. And once you begin to think about that and just integrating into the music, I think it becomes a lot easier and more comfortable. And we also, just like we're practicing anything else, we want to do it in various stages. So I think it's important to be able to start slap tonguing at just a single note. So it might take a little practice to get it exactly the way that you want. Then it's also important to be able to do it in the middle of a phrase. Let me put my clarinet together. It's a little... So you can go back back and forth between the slap tonguing and the regular tonguing. And then it's important to be able to do multiple slap tongues in succession. So practicing it in a variety of formats, I think, is also really helpful. And then the harder part, I think slap tonguing sounds really great in the low register, but sometimes you need to start exploring in the higher register. So you want to start exploring different registers, maybe doing some scale patterns or something else. And start expanding the range of your slap tongue throughout the instrument. And step number 10 is to think about it musically. It's so easy, I think, to get completely fixated on like, okay, I need to create this section, I need to release it, where does my air go, how does it all fit together? And like with the Lowenstern example that I played earlier, each one of the slap tongues are on beats 2 and 4, just kind of accentuating the groove of the music. And so to think about it musically and integrate it as opposed to just thinking about it technically, I think makes a really big difference. And I have a few bonus tips for mastery. I really want to encourage you to limit your practice for this. I think it can be a frustrating thing when you aren't getting the hang of it right away. So do a few minutes and then do something else. I think it's also really helpful to play for a colleague. In my expedited 1 month learning cycle for this, I played both for a friend in my studio, and she pointed out that as I was attempting to slap tongue, I was actually sticking my tongue completely outside of my mouth. So I had the suction, but I wasn't doing the embouchure, and that was really valuable feedback. And I was able to play for the saxophone professor at CU as well, and he, you know, just pushed me over the edge and helped me get the air flowing and to develop the technique. So playing for other people was really, really helpful, and I think it's a great strategy. If we have some time at the end, which we probably will, I'd be happy to you know, take any questions that you have about this, or see if you want any feedback. And you can always email me afterward too, and I would be happy to answer any questions. And the final thing that I'd like to say for my tips is that it's really important to pick appropriate repertoire for learning this. As I was learning, like Michael Lowenstern's piece, like it's pretty groovy and it was a nice introduction. And if I had started learning the technique for a piece like Lang's press release, I think it would have been much more intimidating and frustrating. So pick appropriate repertoire and maybe start with something simple to introduce yourself to the technique. Oh, we do have one question, and asking if I recommend a specific reed strength for slap tonguing. And I play on 2.5 reeds all the time, so they're pretty soft reeds, and it worked pretty well for me. But I think that the softer reeds are more flexible naturally, and so they really allow for that pop to come against the mouthpiece. Oh, so we have one person stating in the comments that he only gets a kind of sucking at step 1 and no click. And what I would say is to keep practicing. It's easier to get more click if you have more mouth or reed in your mouthpiece. Oh. And that, like you're really holding on to it, like somebody's gonna try and steal your reed away from you, and you don't want them to take it. And you can even practice talking, while you're holding the reed. And obviously that's really silly, but the suction is what's really important. I think that will help you progress to step 2, where you can start using less reed to make the suction. Does that help? Okay.
I hope soon. I'm trying for so many years now, but one day it will work. But thank you so much.
Can I see how you're
yeah.
So I would right now it looks like your reed is closer to the top of your mouth, and
okay.
if mine, my teeth are really far away, so it's just the tongue and nothing else.
Okay.
Can you do that again?
Mm-hmm. I really hope nobody is going to look at this. Okay.
Don't worry. When I had a Zoom lesson with one of my colleagues and was going over with him, and I was like, "Oh, everybody's going to think we're really."
I was just wondering which colleague which friend I would bother with that. Okay, I will try it, but that's a good tip. Yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We had another question, and asking if I roll my tongue at all when I create the suction. And when I started, I thought that that's what I was doing, kind of rolling my tongue. And I know that's a dominant trait that not everybody can do. But I feel like that kind of helps to hold on to the reed with the tongue. And you can kind of see the sides of my tongue go up. But ultimately, when you're using the clarinet as a whole, I don't think it's quite rolling. I think it's more of a concave. Where the tongue is going down because there isn't enough like surface area just at the tip. So, but as I said before, I haven't, gone into a CAT scan machine or something to see what's actually happening inside. So it's all just my own hypothesis.
Anybody else have any questions about this technique? I did post a link to our Lunch and Learn session with Jason and Stephanie from a couple weeks ago, where we talked about this actual concept, and there's a little bit more information there that might be a little different and might be very similar. So I hope this has been helpful. I really appreciate your time to share this with us. If you joined us a few minutes late, I'm going to post this up on YouTube, and you can rewatch it as many times as necessary. Would you be able to share your PowerPoint with us, and we can put that up on the ICA website for anybody who's interested, or if you have a link on your personal website?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So we have one more concert coming up soon on YouTube, so I hope you'll join us there to close out this event. And we've been really, really appreciative. I want to just take this time to thank the New Music Committee for putting on this and organizing this event. It's been really incredible. And we'll hopefully do it again next year. So we will see you on YouTube. Thanks so much, Annaka. Have a good night, everybody.